So the federal government, for instance, has had money for charter schools, specific to charter schools when they start out. And so that's money they can potentially have. And there's a lot of foundations out there willing to give to charter schools, but not to traditional public schools. Gates, Walton, and so on. There's been a fair amount of money out there to support these charter schools. And so they make up some of that gap. The other thing that critics have argued about that they recognize that there probably is a funding gap, but they argue also that it doesn't take into account that often the districts is providing transportation to these charter students, and that's really coming out of the district budget, not the charter school budget, and so on. So there are some questions. Go ahead.
Isn't the analysis been done on faculty characteristics, experience, degrees?
Yeah, so there's generally, I was part of a study in California that showed that charter schools typically have less experienced teachers, less credentialed. That's not too surprising. If you're going to have less resources, one way of dealing with that is just hiring junior teachers. And also, you just started a school, who's most likely to apply for a position at a charter school? Is it going to be senior teachers who are happy where they are, or is it going to be possibly teachers right out of college? And so they just generally have younger teachers and less experience.
And can I say something on top of that? I've also seen studies and results talking about how some charter schools, even though you don't have the credentials, say for me, for instance, I'm an attorney, so I could go teach a business law class. I mean, who better to have somebody that's in the field that's seen the things to teach it than somebody that's, I couldn't teach in a regular school because I'm not credentialed. So there's pluses and minuses on that issue as well.
Sure, it doesn't necessarily, having a credential or being more experienced doesn't necessarily guarantee that you're a good teacher. Not having those things doesn't necessarily mean you're a bad teacher. But it's something that generally states have valued, and at least they're paying premiums for those type of things. The other thing that charter schools have used widely is Teach for America faculty. But these people generally only stay 2 or 3 years. They're very bright people. They're from very good schools and so on. But that's also been having been used. Next slide, please. So what are the ways that charter policies can vary across states? So I just thought I'd at least list out some things. Cap on the number of charter schools. Some places do not have any caps. Some have a cap, but they're not binding, so you can have 1,000 charter schools and you can only have 100, so it doesn't really matter. And then there's places that don't have a cap at all. The approval process, who can authorize a charter school? So some states allow districts, state, nonprofits, universities, so on. Some places it's only the district. And there's this philosophical argument to say, well, should we allow districts to authorize charter schools, or should they be the only people that can authorize charter schools because they're in real competition with charter schools? However, you could also use the perspective of saying, well, nonprofit may not know anything about education, and at least the district has that experience to support the charter schools. So there's a philosophical argument there. Also, the types of charter schools in some states, it can be new schools, conversion from public, conversion from private. You can have cyber, virtual schools. So these are ways that they can vary. Some places it can only be a startup or only be a operation. So how much freedom are you going to give charter schools in terms of regulations? Are you going to just say whatever the charter schools deems as valuable you're going to allow? Or are there going to be certain restrictions? It could be just facilities or who you hire, so on. Can schools be operated by for-profit organizations? Is there assistance for transportation facilities? On the funding side, is funding going to be on par with traditional public school, or is the state going to take a strategy to say this is maybe a way we can create greater efficiencies by giving them those resources? Is it funneled through the district? Is the district going to take some of those resources off the top for services they provide to charter schools? And are there going to be fees for the oversight? Next slide, please. So teachers is a big issue that also can be important for the policy. Are you going to require them to be part of a union? Are you going to require them to be certified? District employees, part of the retirement system. All of this could affect who actually teaches at these schools, because Because if you, for instance, say they can't be part of the state retirement system or something, you're going to get very different teachers. You're not going to get the experienced teachers to switch over there. They're going to lose that money. Or if you're going to get union teachers, you may get different types of teachers than if you didn't. Students, there's questions about, are you going to only allow students within the district in which that charter school is located to attend it, or are you going to open it up to anyone in the state to attend that charter school? That varies across states. Do you have a lottery for oversubscription? How are schools reimbursed for special education? This has actually been a very contentious issue. So in some states, they only give you basically the average cost of a special education student, but we know there's a great deal of variation in what a special ed student can cost. And so it gives very little incentive for charter schools to try and encourage those high-need students to come into their schools if they're going to cost them $50,000 a year, when you're only getting maybe $20,000 to educate that child. So special education is a big issue and should be considered when thinking about a charter law. Accountability, some states actually do financial audits. Where is the money going? Is it ended up, you have principals getting paid exorbitant salaries. Are they getting reasonable salaries? Is there possibly conflicts of interest in terms of the board members and so on? Is there procedures for closing a charter school? So if you set up a charter contract and they are not performing as assigned, what are you going to do? In California, this was a painful experience in some cases. There was one charter school that had 10,000 students. Suddenly they closed it right before the school. What do you do with 10,000 students 2 weeks before school starts? There should be a plan in place to think about closing a charter school and how you're going to deal with those students if you close a charter school. Next slide. So that was a little bit about the policies. There's lots of other ways policies could vary. Here are some general conclusions from the presentation today. Charter schools in the literature are not really creating substantial new stratification, and we're not really seeing them systematically take the best students from traditional public schools. And in terms of student achievement, the results for charter schools' performance through traditional public schools has been somewhat mixed. I think the reality is that there are good and bad charter schools, just like there are good and bad traditional public schools. And one of the things that is interesting here is that we did find some association between going to a charter high school and graduating high school and going on to college. And at least that's worth taking note. Let's see, and then generally across states, charter schools are using fewer public resources than traditional public schools. Some of that gap can be made up by private resources, but that's a general pattern observed. Currently, there's very little research on how the variation in the operation of charter schools affects performance. So if there are a subset of charter schools doing X, does that lead to better performance? We don't know a lot about that. We don't know a lot about the variation in charter laws, with the exception of the Credo study. So that is my presentation. I'm more than happy to answer questions people have. I'll leave it to you.
Okay, I'm afraid I shortchanged Dr. Zimmer on his qualifications. In your package, you have his resume. I won't try to read it all, but he's obviously a nationally recognized expert in this area. And I'm sure we'll ask some questions. I have a couple of questions. If you were to recommend to us other states that have charter school laws, which one would you recommend you think have the best laws in each area, charter school laws?
I'm not sure I can say which state has the best charter laws just because there's not concrete evidence on that right now. I could say there's certain places where we've at least seen positive results for charter schools. And for instance, New York City and Boston, both places, Boston's test score gains for charter schools were very impressive, very impressive. And one of the things interesting about Boston's study is they allowed charter schools, and then they said, let's take traditional public schools and give them just greater autonomy and see which ones do better. And they found charter schools did better than the ones who were just granted a greater autonomy. I don't know what was unique about that. I think that's something that needs to be explored. We've also seen places, Ohio for instance, where charter schools have not done very well. And And some of the things going on there is